I may sound like a broken record with how often I say this about episodes of Cheers, but Everyone Imitates Art is a fantastic episode. This is the 10th episode of the 5th season of Cheers. It's directed by the wonderful James Burrows, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episodes and share some thoughts. Compared to some other episodes, I don't have a tremendous amount of notes. That does not mean I didn't love it, because I absolutely did, but I just don't have as many notes as perhaps some of the more recent episodes. Maybe this means this discussion will be slightly shorter for a change. And it starts off quite delightfully with Woody listening to the radio. There's an advert for a court stenographer, and he tries to write down the number and he is unable to do it, which basically means he wouldn't be able to be a court stenographer. And it was a nice light-hearted way to start things off. Carla then comes in after the intro. We have Carla coming in really annoyed because she's been planning a pilgrimage to Memphis as she's an Elvis fan, and Nick has backed out of taking the kids as apparently his appendix burst. Seems like a reasonable excuse, but apparently he says this every time she needs a favour. And I'll just sum up Carla's part of the story very quickly, because that's basically all we get from it. A little later on, Nick does finally agree to watch the kids. I would have liked to have known a little bit more about his motivation for that, or why he changed his mind, as we don't really learn too much about it. And then, towards the end of the episode, Carla then comes in, dressed in all of the clothing she's bought in Memphis, and is really happy. It's a nice part of the story, but it definitely is just padding surrounding the main narrative. The main narrative focuses on Diane, and Shelley Long's performance throughout this is just absolutely incredible. And especially the last 5 minutes, it's just an impossible emotional roller coaster, but beautifully, beautifully done. Diane has received a letter from Syzygy, which is a literary publication, and it turns out it's actually a rejection letter. But with the wording of the letter, she's kind of reading it as if they're encouraging her to submit more. And Sam says, and I quote, "You turn every defeat into a victory," which is something to be said about Diane. She does try to look on the bright side, largely because it helps to inflate her ego, let's be honest. But I do think that's something very admirable about Diane. And Sam tries to convince her that it's just a standard rejection letter. She won't have it. So he says that he'll write a poem and he'll submit it, and he will, of course, receive the same rejection letter. And this is what the episode is all about. Sam does submit a poem. The magazine comes back, and he doesn't tell Diane. Instead, he tells her to turn to a certain page to read out a poem to him, which she's very happy to do. And as soon as she reads Nocturne by Sam Malone, she screams and drops the magazine. And as I said, Shelley Long's performance in this is just incredible, absolutely incredible. Diane kind of recognises the poem, but she can't place her finger on it. And she's determined to find out where Sam has plagiarised this poem from. And she comes into Cheers soon after, looking less kempt than usual, and she's smoking, which she doesn't do, and she's carrying a lot of poetry books, and she starts to really quickly sift through them, and she's drinking a lot of coffee. And needless to say, in the day of the internet, this would be a significantly easier task, in theory. But I'll talk more about why that's only a theory in a little bit. And she's desperately trying to find this poem. And again, we have this amazing performance as she kind of pours her heart out to Sam, and has come to the conclusion that in her mind, she has climbed as high as she'll ever climb. She's got writer's block. She will never be a writer. She will never be a poet. She will never write a great play. And I'm watching this as a writer, it kind of gets to me. Because if you are a writer, or I assume an artist of any kind, you will know exactly how she feels. You'll know exactly what that pain is like when you feel like you're not good enough, and you'll never be the success you want to be, and your work will never be as good as you want it to be. And it's kind of hard-hitting. It really is. And Diane has basically reached a point where she's given up. And Sam ends up dragging her to his office in the chair because she basically emotionally collapses, and the scene gets rather interesting. I also forgot to mention, before Diane emotionally collapses, she finds out that Woody also submitted a poem and got the same rejection letter, and that's when she realises that actually it was just a standard letter. and there was no encouragement for her. And I feel like that was just the straw that broke the camel's back. And she tells all of this to Sam. He drags her into the office. And from that point, what a roller coaster. And I think Diane was very unpredictable here. But it's also very, very well done. Because Sam confesses to her that yes, he did indeed plagiarize the poem. And it turns out it was one of Diane's poems, and he hands her this little pink note, and Diane reads it and recognises that it's a love letter she gave to Sam. And one might question why Diane didn't recognise her own poem, but I think with Diane, she writes so frequently and so much. And I imagine with Diane, with this love letter, I imagine she'd be writing this poem without planning it out. I think she'd just be pouring the words out of her as they come to her. So if she's doing that so frequently and writing many, many love letters to Sam with presumably many, many love poems, it's not something she's going to be sticking in her mind too long. But that's why I think there was that feigned recognition. But it's not something she wrote and perfected and rewrote. I believe she just wrote it as she felt it and gave it to Sam. So that's kind of my explanation as to why she didn't recognise her own writing. And she's so elated because she's published. Her poem was published, even if it was with Sam's name. And she's clearly very happy. But then she points out to Sam that he always gets away with doing these things. He did a terrible, terrible thing. And she's going to make him suffer. And we have this adorable exchange where she says, I'm going to make you suffer. Sam asks, what are you going to do? And Shelley Long's performance when she says, I don't know, is the cutest thing ever. The expression on her face is so adorable. And I feel like in this moment, Diane is feeling so many different emotions. And it's making her react in very different ways. And she declares that she's going to go out and get drunk, as poets do. And Sam finds out that his punishment is just to tell others that he stole the poem. And since everybody else kind of suspected that anyway, I don't think that was a big deal. But before he gets a chance to leave the office, Diane comes skipping back in and throws her arms around him and kisses him. And it's this most beautiful moment. And we learn that this is because Diane's just realised, and this didn't occur to me either, Sam kept the love letters. And that to her is confirmation that he does indeed love her. And of course, Sam tries to deny it. And we have a moment where actually I felt kind of sick because of how brutal it was. But it's very short-lived, as I said, real roller coaster. It's the moment where Diane tells Sam, look me in the eyes and tell me you don't love me. And if you do, I will have no choice but to believe you. And honestly, I feel horrible even talking about it because it's such a brutal moment where Sam does hold on to Diane and he does look her in the eyes and he does say, I don't love you. I thought I did once, but I don't now. I was wrong. And that's horrible. Even to say I was wrong that I thought I loved you. It's not even a case of I did love you and now I don't. It's the fact that he's saying he was wrong to ever think he loved her. And that's just, it's horrible. And the sudden shift in Diane's expression, again, so much praise for Shelley Long's performance here, is heartbreaking. And she leaves the room. And then we see Sam reaching into his filing cabinet and pulling out this little box with this huge bundle of love letters, all neatly stacked with this little ribbon tying them together. And it's adorable. And then Diane comes in and catches him and she's ecstatic and she gives him this most wonderful side hug and kind of buries her head into his neck as Sam is frantically trying to convince her that the love letters don't mean anything and he has a battery in there and some paper clips. And his attempt is absolutely pointless because nobody can believe him at this point, but it is adorable. It's beautiful. I absolutely loved it. So we went from being absolutely heartbroken, at least I did, with the way Sam spoke to Diane, to being completely overjoyed with this, I would say, concrete evidence that Sam still loves her. So a tremendous episode. As a writer, I feel a lot of this. I feel a lot of the pain and the frustration that Diane was feeling. Anybody else who is a writer or a creative of any kind, I think will unfortunately also be able to relate in some ways. Shelley Long's performance was perfect, spectacular, Really loved this episode. I know, as I said at the beginning, I tend to say each episode is amazing. There are a couple, very, very occasionally, there will be an episode that I'm not that bothered about. But needless to say, Everyone Imitates Art is not one of those episodes. I truly love it.